It says this, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Have you ever had someone come alongside of you in a time of need? When you were going through perhaps a very difficult time, a season in your life, to have someone or a group of people that came alongside of you, helped you kind of navigate that difficulty. I may have referenced a little bit in the past that when Timothy was born, the first, I think, few days, first week, everything was fine. When he was in the hospital, obviously, it was great joy to our family. But 1 week after he was born, when we went to the doctor's office for a follow-up, the doctor was listening to his heart. And he kind of spent, he did it in a way you knew something was a little bit off. And basically he said, hey, I'm hearing something right now that I did not hear in the hospital. And I think it's something that we have to get checked out. And so the following couple months after that appointment was, going to see a doctor, one doctor to another, finally being, sent to a specialist. He had to, we ran a bunch of tests, EKGs. I don't know how many times we did that. Ultrasounds and all of these things to kind of look at his heart. Finally, the specialist told us, Timothy has a hole in his heart. And because of it, sometimes the holes will close on its own. But sometimes they do not. And in those cases, we have to operate. And so that was something that we were always holding into the back of our heads. And, and we proceeded from one appointment to another. And finally, the specialist said, hey, the location of his hole and what we think is the size of it, we don't think it's going to close on its own. I think we're going to have to operate. This was Christmas time around 2010, the year that he was born. Just a few months. He was, I think about 2.5 months at this point when we were told we have to operate. But we'll try to wait as long as we can and start getting scheduled. So in January of 2011, I remember Hannah and I, we woke up early to take Timothy to go in to be checked in, and then, as I was holding him and kind of passed him on to the nurse, we saw the nurse kind of take him in. It was a very difficult moment and difficult season for us. But, throughout this time, obviously, our parents, our families, Hannah and I, we were alone in California. My parents lived up here. My sister was up here. I had an older sister in LA. We were in Orange County. Her parents were living in Japan at the time. And it's like our family was there. We felt their presence, but they were, physically they were separated by many thousands of miles. And, one of the things that we were in a small group at the time, and we told the members of our small group, hey, this is what's going on, this is what the diagnosis is, and this is what's going to happen. Immediately, they kind of came around us. They began to pray for us, encourage us, and share with us their own experiences when their children was born. One of the guys who was the leader of the group, he said, hey, when my daughter was born, we were also told that she had a hole in her heart. And we kept on monitoring her for a long time. And he said after she turned about one day they went to a doctor's office and the hole was closed on its own. And another family who also had the same issue with their daughter and who operated as well. And she was healthy, about 11 or so at the time. So they encouraged us along the way. And during that time in the hospital, they came to visit us. The first night that Timothy, night of his operation, they came. He was still in intensive, recovery center, and so we had several people come. Actually, the whole small group pretty much came, and a couple of them went in to see Timothy. They prayed for him, and I went in there with a friend of mine, and he went in there. He's a doctor. We went in. He says, "Hey, his color is already better." So when because of the hole in Timothy's heart, when we look at his pictures when he was younger, he was very pale because the oxygenated blood was not going to his body, but it was leaking back into the other chamber. And so I didn't notice that, but he, being a medical doctor, he said, hey, I see the color is much better for him. So, when we look back at that moment, it's already, 2016. And actually, no, you can see Timothy, he's running around, he's healthy, He has no effects from that operation, but that season in our time, for Hannah and I, if we didn't have our small group, I don't know what we would have done. But we had these people who loved us and cared for us to really come alongside of us in our time of need. Maybe you have experienced such a powerful example as well. But one thing that showed me was when they visited us in the hospital, it reminded me, it was a message to me that they cared, that they're in this together, that they did not want us to be alone, that they would not allow us to go through this alone, but really be there for us. Visits, prayers, just the support. And these same people really celebrated Timothy's first birthday. In our Korean culture, the first birthday tour is it's huge, right? So we threw a huge party. These people were there. They were part of the program. And we all celebrated the journey that Timothy kind of took through the first year of his life. When we're faced with these pressing needs, having someone come alongside of us, it can be a tremendous source of comfort and hope. And today, I finish our series on prayer today with this idea of bearing one another's burdens. And I'm going to share how this ties into prayer, how this ties into intercession. In the New Testament, there are two words that is translated commonly with this idea of bearing. First word that we see is called anekomai, and it means this: to sustain, to bear, or hold up against a thing. Basically, this word anekomai it means to stand alongside someone that is in need, letting him or her lean against you. Okay, that's the first idea of that word. Second word that we see is called bastazo. It means to bearing or carrying something away, not just lifting or sustaining, but removing. This one is a little bit deeper idea. It's not just to help sustain, but it's actually, if you can, lift and carry away someone's burden. So these are the two words that we see throughout the New Testament that the English translation usually shows bear or bearing. In Galatians 6:2, we see the second word, bastazo, and it uses the word carry, or carry each other's burdens, basically. There's some passages that I want to highlight that shows these words in use. First one is Romans 15:1. We who are strong ought to what? Bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Second one, Galatians 6:2, which is our today's verse. Carry, that's the word. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Ephesians 4:2 says this: be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. And lastly, Colossians 3:13 says, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. In the last two passages, Ephesians 4:2 and Colossians 3:13, the word that we see is the word anekomai. Okay? When we see that, we're saying, hey, sustain or hold up someone's burden. What this idea is this: we recently, our family, with the help of Abigail and Timothy, I planted a little tomato plant in a backyard. I don't know if it's going to produce anything. We'll see. But Abby went on a field trip from her preschool, and they gave us a tomato plant. So Abby's like, "Oh, Appa, I want to plant it." I said, "Okay." So we planted it. If you've ever grown tomatoes, tomatoes are one of those remarkable plants that they produce a tremendous amount of fruit, but if you look at the vine, the plant itself is very weak. If you do not use some kind of a stake to hold the plant as it grows and as it starts to produce fruit, the entire plant will just basically collapse under the weight of its own fruit. And the fruit will just basically hang on the floor or on the ground. It'll get dirty, the bugs will get at it, and I don't think you will get to enjoy too much of its fruit. So what happens is usually there's this cylinder wire thing that comes up like this. It's got four little stakes that you kind of put into the ground. And as the tomato plant grows, what you do is you take the leaf branches, you let it hang on the wires. And as it continues to grow, you put it up and up and up. And as it does that, as the fruits begin to, what do you say? As it produce, what is the saying? Flower, blossoms, fruits, what? Is there a word for that? Anyways, as it produces its plant, the fruit, the tomatoes, the weight is shared by the stake. And that is what that word really is talking about. It's the same thing that you see in a small young tree. When you see a tree that's planted, it's usually staked. There's usually a stake that is connected to both sides and is connected. Why? As the tree grows, the stake helps it to be stable, helps it also to grow straight and whatever. That is the idea of that word, bear, or that we see in Ephesians and in Colossians. In Romans 15:1, as well as Galatians 6:2, it says that we're called to carry, and that Greek word is bastazo. We're called to carry those burdens away. A burden is a heaviness of heart. It is something that causes our soul, our spirit to be weighed down. Okay? It is it could be many different things. But usually a burden, sometimes we say, oh, my heart is heavy. You hear that expression. My heart is heavy. Jesus in the garden of Gethsemane, his heart was heavy. Why? Because there was a burden of the world was upon his shoulders. It is something that weighs us down emotionally, mentally, spiritually, even physically. Sometimes the burden is such that physically we feel the pain. What are some burdens that those around us might be going through or dealing with? I think first thing we see is the burden of sin. I think the worst burdens are those that are caused by us yielding or us falling into sin. The older I get, the more I realize, you know what? Sin will be with me until I die. And that is a scary thought. To say, you know what? I'm going to deal with these types of things all the way for the next, 40 years of my life. I don't see it getting any better. Temptations are always there. I don't know about you, but there are times when I'm like, you know what? I think I got this. Only to realize, you know what? I don't. And that's the challenge. The older you get, the more struggles you have, the longer your struggle, the greater the burden of sin. When you relapse, when you fall into sin, when you make that mistake, when you say, you know what, I'm not gonna get angry, but you get angry, you get disappointed, and that burden just weighs on you. It's almost like the weight of all the past gets added on top. The burden of sin is definitely something that we bear, we carry on a daily basis. There are also emotional burdens. An emotional burden might be brought on by feelings of disappointment, neglect, disappointments with people, disappointment with God. For younger children, emotional burden might develop because of being bullied at school. Or maybe because of some kind of tragedy that happens. Maybe an illness that strikes a family member. Whatever the case, there are emotional burdens that we carry. For a parent, it might be their child, a child who has gone a little away from the Lord, or a sick child. There are also physical burdens, an injury, a suffering of some sort, an accident, or sometimes just old age. I look at my parents, they're not getting any younger. I see every year certain things happen, and physically they just are a little more limited each year. My father has had a couple minor little strokes. I mean, he's still able to move and do things. They still go, in Korean it's called kosari, right? Fern, basically. They still go pick that in the forest. And I'm like, Dad, Mom, are you guys crazy? Please stop. They're like, no, we just need enough for us. And they go at least 3 or 4 times a year. But in the past, they used to go a lot. And they go because even though they almost died. I think it was about, I don't know how many years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago maybe, 7 or 8 years ago. They went out. And my cousin came home after work. And she realized that my parents were not home at the time. They're like, what's going on? Hey, have you heard from Mom and Dad? She started making phone calls to my sister. I was living in California at the time. We get a text message, hey, Mom and Dad went to go pick kosari, and they're not back. 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I'm waiting for news. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, no news. This is the springtime in Oregon. Rainy, it's cold. 10 o'clock, no news. They haven't been found yet. 11 o'clock, they started calling the police. Earlier in the day, they just said, we don't know where they went. They didn't tell us where they went. They could have gone east into the Mount Hood forest, or they could have gone west into the coastal range. We had no idea. Really didn't sleep that much, I think, that night. Next morning, I get news. No news. We don't know where they are. 7, 8 o'clock, nothing. 9 o'clock, nothing. 10 o'clock, nothing. 11 o'clock, finally, I get a text message. They're home. So what happened was my mom and dad went alone. And as they were picking, they filled up a couple bags. And my dad took that back to the car while my mom kept on picking. And they got lost. They lost each other. And though they began to search for each other, they spent the night in the dark, in the forest. My dad has a little bit of diabetes. They didn't have water with them. They didn't have any food. Somehow in the middle of the night, they found each other. Woke up next morning, trying to look for where they are, try to get to a car. And they found a road, like an old logging road, and they saw some kind of a tractor or something, so they started going towards it. And they were like, this road kind of looks familiar, but let's follow it and see where it goes. At that moment, some guy shows up in a pickup truck. He came to get that tractor. And they're like waving, he's like, what in the world? So in their broken English, they basically tell him, hey, we're kind of lost. Can you take us to the main highway? And my mom and dad said that in the car, they went down the road, took a right turn, and the highway was right there. And the car was right there. They were maybe like just 1,000 or 2,000 feet from the car all night long. But they just couldn't find it in the dark. It was raining. And, when they got home, they just went to sleep. And my cousin luckily said, you need to go to the hospital. So they went into the emergency. And, long story short, their levels of their kidney, my dad's, because being diabetic, he didn't put any food or water or any sugar. he almost died. My mom was not very close to that as well. Yet they still go. And I'm like, Mom and Dad, what are you guys doing? But that's what they do. Physically, they're limited. And every time they go, I get worried, I get nervous. I always tell them, where are you going? Tell us. Don't go alone. At least go with somebody else. But the people that they go with, they're all similar age to them. So all these people in their 60s are going out into the forest for gosari. I never throw gosari away. I eat every single bite. Because literally my parents staked their life on that. Physical limitations. We see this all the time. When we see people around us that are limited physically because of an illness or some kind of just advancing in their age, it's a burden that you and I have to see. Financial burden. Sometimes an investment that goes wrong or goes south. Perhaps a layoff. Intel, IBM, these are just a couple companies that are around us that are causing, that are laying people off. A medical emergency, or whatever the case might be. Financial is another burden that people might be dealing with. It's not so much nowadays, but back in 2008 and 2009, we saw the prime mortgages, how the payments increased so much for people that they could not pay their rent. People were losing their home, foreclosing. I knew a lot of people who lost their homes because they either lost a job or they just could not afford the payments anymore. Financial burden is stress, is tremendous amount of stress, especially on a marriage. I saw marriages that were strained because of finances. I know one of the guys I know, he started a small business. It went really well, and he decided to franchise it. And then the franchisees and the board kicked him out. And he's like, it's funny, America is funny. A company I started, and now I have no control over any aspect. Financial strain for that family began to show up. Because all of a sudden, everything that he had built up was gone. They were forced to, I think he was forced to sell off his stores as well. The power of the board. We see the financial burdens. We see the burden of sin, emotional, physical, all of these things. There are countless other ways that people are burdened all around us. Even this past couple of weeks, Hannah showed me a picture on Facebook. She said, "Is this who I think it is?" I looked at the picture. I was like, "Oh no, I don't know who that person is." She said, "Look again." I looked carefully. I saw a picture of a guy. I did not recognize him. It seems like he had aged 20 years. You see, 3 or 4 years ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. Skin cancer, stage, I believe it was stage 3 or 4. And because of the stage and the type of cancer that he had, they're like, we're not really sure if any of these treatments is going to work for you. But there are some new things that are yet approved, but we may be able to get that going for you. So they started that process. And at the beginning, I think they were able to kind of stabilize the growth of the cancer or the spread of cancer. But the picture that I saw this past week, and then I followed up with the pastor of the church. I said, "Hey, what's going on with him?" And then he updated me. The medication, he tried several different new medication and combos. It really didn't, his body didn't respond to that. And now the cancer has spread. He had skin cancer that was up here. Now the cancer has spread to his legs. And when I saw the picture of him, he looked completely different. And I remember visiting him and talking to him. He's a father of 3. Youngest is 2 or 3 years old. And if the body and the cancer is not responding to the treatment and it's really spread, really at this point is only an act of God. Unless God intervenes. the future does not look so good. And so as he was up there receiving prayer from the people of the church, my heart was heavy. Because I remember hearing the news and walking this journey with him. I thought everything was going well. And then I see him, and I was just shocked. Also, this past week, my mom told me that a pastor that we know also was in a hospital in California. He collapsed. He's on life support. His family is preparing to say goodbye. These are just some of the things that happen all around us. There are people in need. And, these news types of news, one or two is okay. But if it's constant, you hear, it takes its toll. At least for me, it takes a toll emotionally. It drains me. I have my own burdens to deal with. But when you add on to the burdens of the others, it can be overwhelming at times. But what does Paul say? Carry each other's burdens. We're called to carry each other's burdens. When you discover someone around you who has need, who has a burden that they are carrying, Paul says, carry that person's burden. If you've ever walked with a person going through a difficult time, you know that it requires a lot of resources, a lot of time. And sometimes because of that, we are hesitant. We don't want to get involved because it's going to require perhaps a long-term commitment. But Paul says, you know what? You have to carry one another's burdens. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, the construction of that sentence is this. It implies the idea of carry each other's burdens and keep on carrying. So this idea of carry and keep on carrying each other's burdens. It's not just one-time deal, but you do it and you keep on doing it for as long as that person is under the weight of that burden. Someone wrote our response to the types of burdens that people are going through. It says this: if the burden is a result of a person's sin, Galatians 6:1, the verse right preceding this says this: restore the brother or sister gently. Restore was the word used by ancient Greek doctors to refer to the setting of a broken bone. The idea of restore is like setting a broken bone. When you have a bone that is broken, you want to set it well, right? And what do? You usually put a cast over it so that it has time for the bone to heal. You want it to be straight, you want it to heal, and you want it to regain its strength. That is this idea of restore. If you've ever had a bone set, you know that you want it done carefully, you want it done gently, but most importantly, it's done for healing, not for punishment. That's the idea of restore. Sometimes we feel like when we are being restored because of a sin, we feel like, why are you punishing me? But it's this idea of not punishment, but rather it's for healing. If a person is going through, has a burden that is emotional, then you bear it through counsel, hugs, listening, and prayers. You may do that day after day after day. And this is the idea that Paul's stressing in Galatians 6:2. You carry and you keep on carrying that burden. As long as that brother or sister carries the burden. If the burden is financial, the burden is borne by giving your money or other assistance to that person. Maybe you help that person out for this particular season. Maybe you work your connections to help him get back on his feet through a job. If the burden is physical, you bear it through your time, your effort, compassion, and energy. Whatever the cause, bearing the burden means carrying the load until the brother or sister can walk unburdened on his own again. That is the idea that Paul is stressing in Galatians 6:2. When we say carry each other's burden, we mean carry it and keep on carrying it until that person can stand on their own. I love the old proverb that says this: a joy shared is double joy. A burden shared is half a burden. See, when you have someone that comes alongside of you to carry that burden with you, the weight of the burden now is half. Imagine if you have other people that come. They take the weight and it's distributed to the others. John Piper says this: if a Christian brother or sister is weighed down by or menaced by some burden or threat, be alert to that and quickly do something to help. Don't let them be crushed. Don't let them be destroyed. Don't increase burdens. Make them lighter for people. Some of you wonder what you are supposed to do in your life. Here is a vocation that will bring you more satisfaction than if you became a millionaire 10 times over. He says this: develop the extraordinary skill for detecting the burdens of others and devote yourself daily to making them lighter. Let me read that again. Develop the extraordinary skill for detecting the burdens of others and devote yourselves to making them lighter. Such wise words, wise counsel. How does intercessory prayer fit into all this? I don't know what your experience is when you pray for people, but when I pray for the family this past week, my heart literally ached. It literally hurt. As I was praying for him, I was literally saying, just feeling the pain. There's something about intercession. There's something about when you pray for someone that has a need. I felt the pain. Literally carrying that burden. Shouldering that burden with him. That is what happens. When you intercede on behalf of other people, you carry that person's weight, the burden of the weight of the burden. In a sense, that gets transferred onto us. Sometimes it's the come and lean against me. Sometimes it's that. They just need someone to come and lean against. Sometimes it's let's carry this together. Let's carry this weight together. As we share that burden together, we are literally carrying that person's burden. And that's why I think I feel it. And that's what intercession does. That's the power of intercession. You pray not only because your heart is stirred for that person, but you also are moved. Your heart is moved for the things of God. You want God to intervene. I mean, the reason why I pray for him is God has to intervene here. He's tried all of the medications. He's tried all of the treatments. It's getting worse. God has to intervene. Remember, I said intercession creates a meeting. I am meeting before God and say, God, go and meet with Tim. Would you meet him? Restore him. I don't know, heal him. But also comfort him. Strength, give him strength. What his wife and his family, his kid, his oldest son is now, he's at an age, he knows what's going on. He's about 7 or 8 now. He knows. He knows his dad is sick. He can literally see his dad physically change over the last couple of years. It's about 1.5 years since we've seen him. He has changed so much. It's shocking. This bearing or this carrying is what standing in the gap looks like. Remember Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 30. God says, I looked among you. I looked for someone who will stand in the gap so that I will not destroy. Basically, a city, the people. At the very end of Ezekiel 22:30, God says this, but I found no one. Verse 31, because I found no one, I am going to destroy. Bring the judgment that I really do not want to. But because no one stood in the gap, because no one interceded, I will destroy. Intercession. To stand in the gap. To look around us to the people that have need and to be able to share and carry that person's burden. That is what standing in the gap looks like. The importance of intercessory prayer cannot be overlooked. It's not just you pray for that person. There's things that happen when you pray for people. Dutch Sheets, in his book, Intercessory Prayer, he writes this quote, Christ is looking for a volunteer army that will stretch forth his strong scepter of authority, ruling in the midst of their enemies, enforcing his great victory. My hope and my prayer is that I am looking at the members of that army this morning. And when I look out here, I am seeing God stirring and raising up an army that will become intercessors. My heart and my hope is that we develop a culture here at Yeongnak of intercessory prayer. That we would unite together to pray for our families, pray for our church, pray for our city, pray for our nation, pray for the world. Because there is power when we pray, but there's power when we pray together. My heart and my prayer is that you guys will see and understand through the last, couple months, that we see prayer is powerful. Not only are we commanded to pray, not only are we given a model to pray, but we see the effects of prayer. You and I, we have all experienced the power of prayer. Hopefully we come to a place where we pray. Do as what Paul is saying. Carry the burdens. And carry it and keep on carrying the burden of others. Look around you. We have needs. We just don't share them. We have needs. We're carrying a weight, a burden, and sometimes we're going at it alone. That's what we hear. That's what we are here. That's what we're gathered to worship. If our worship is void of that caring, then what is it? I would love to see us get involved and get connected with each other's lives. To share. Say, you know what, this is a need that I have in my life. Would you pray for me? Don't go at it alone. We are here to lean against. We're here to help you sustain, to lift, and to carry that burden.